Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The atmosphere aboard the Zaloth Empire's flagship was thick with tension. Damien, a battle-hardened soldier from Earth, had earned his place in the high ranks of the alien empire after a series of daring feats that had turned the tide of war. But he hadn't expected this. Standing in the royal chambers of the empire's queen, surrounded by ornate, alien architecture, his thoughts were anything but military strategy. His mind raced, not with calculations for battle, but with an offer that had been as unexpected as it was bewildering. Queen Talia of the Zaloth Empire, her golden skin shimmering beneath the soft light of the chamber's holographic projections, stood before him, her regal presence commanding the space. She had the stature of a ruler, a warrior, and the steely gaze of someone who had fought tooth and nail to hold her throne. Yet, there was something in her eyes now, an uncertainty of vulnerability, that Damien had never seen before. "You've done well, Damien," she said, her voice resonating with a power that echoed through the chamber. "Your victories in battle have secured the future of this empire. The rebels are scattered. The noble houses are bending to my will. But there's still much to be done." Damien nodded, a sense of pride and duty swelling in his chest. The Zaloth Empire had been on the brink of collapse when he had arrived, and now, under Queen Talia's leadership, they had pushed back the rebels and restored order. He had given everything for this cause, but what was to come next, he had no idea. Talia continued, her eyes narrowing slightly as she spoke. "I have a proposal for you, Damien. A proposal that will change the course of history." Damien's brow furrowed. Proposal? He had assumed that the next step would be more strategic planning, more military campaigns to solidify their hold on the galaxy. He had not expected this. "You've earned my trust," she said, her voice now laced with a strange intensity. "And more than that, you've earned a place by my side. But I need more than just an ally. I need someone who can share in the burden of ruling this empire. Someone who can help me stabilize the future. Someone who will stand with me as an equal." Damien's heart skipped a beat. Was she offering him power? He knew that his military prowess had gained her respect, but this felt different. "What are you saying, Your Majesty?" he asked, his voice low with caution. Talia took a step closer, her eyes locking with his. There was no hesitation in her gaze now, only purpose. "I'm offering you a chance to rule this empire, Damien. Not as my advisor, not as a mere soldier, but as my partner. Marry me, become my king. Together, we can reshape the future of the Zaloth Empire." Damien's mind reeled. Marry her? Become king? The idea was as absurd as it was alluring. He was a soldier, an outsider in this alien world. How could he, someone from a distant planet, ever be expected to rule by the side of a queen who was the embodiment of the empire itself? "I understand if this seems sudden," Talia continued, her voice softening just slightly. "But the offer is real. Marry me, Damien. Help me secure this empire for future generations. And I will make sure you are rewarded beyond your wildest dreams." She raised her hand, a faint glow radiating from the delicate jewelry adorning her fingers. A holographic projection flickered to life in the air, displaying a series of riches, vast lands, fleets of warships, and luxuries beyond comprehension. "All of this could be yours, Damien. The wealth, the power, the influence, everything you've ever dreamed of. But there's a price, of course. This isn't just about love or ambition. It's about loyalty, about uniting our worlds under a single rule." Damien's thoughts raced. This was a queen offering him a throne, a power few could ever dream of. But he wasn't a man of ambition. He had joined this empire to fight, to survive. The idea of ruling was foreign to him. And yet, the offer was tempting more than he had ever expected. Talia watched him carefully, sensing his hesitation. "I know this isn't a decision you can make lightly, but I ask that you consider it. Together we can be unstoppable. We can create an empire that will last for millennia." Damien's gaze wandered to the hologram, the fleet of ships that would be at his command, the immense wealth and power. It was an intoxicating vision, one that appealed to every instinct in him that longed for a place of significance in this foreign galaxy. But deep down, he knew that accepting her offer would change everything. He would never be the same man. He would no longer be just a soldier, just a man from Earth. He would be a ruler, a king, and that power came with its own price. "I need time to think," he said finally, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts spinning through his mind. Talia smiled, a mixture of understanding and something darker beneath the surface. "Of course, take as much time as you need. But remember, Damien, the offer stands. I won't wait forever." As she turned and walked toward the exit, her silhouette framed by the vast windows overlooking the stars, Damien felt a sense of unease settle over him. He had been thrust into a world of unimaginable power, and now he had to decide whether to claim it or walk away. But as the door slid shut behind her, Damien knew that whatever decision he made, it would change the fate of the Empire and his own destiny forever. Damien stood on the sleek, cold metal of the ship's ramp, his boots making an odd echo as he followed Queen Talia into the heart of her ship. The imposing figure of the Queen, her alien beauty almost too perfect to comprehend, led him through corridors that seemed to bend and shift with every step. The walls hummed with an energy that was unfamiliar to him, yet oddly comforting. Talia's presence filled the air like a heavy perfume. Everything about her was designed to command attention. The way she moved, the authority in her voice, the intense glow in her eyes that hinted at untold power. For a moment, Damien wondered if he was truly capable of understanding the depths of her mind. Was she simply a monarch playing a game of politics? Or was there something more to this unusual offer? The Queen's ship was a marvel. Alien technology far beyond human comprehension surrounded them. Holographic maps of entire star systems flickered in the air, alien languages scrolled across walls, and weapon systems that looked like nothing Damien had ever seen hummed silently in the background. "I have been watching you, Captain Holt," Talia said, her voice smooth like silk. "You are a warrior, a survivor. Your species has something rare: resilience, determination. It is something I have not found in any of my own people. You fascinate me." Damien's mind raced. He couldn't be sure whether her words were just a flattery designed to gain his trust or a genuine observation. He had been trained to detect lies, but even his instincts were unsure. She was too enigmatic, too powerful. Still, he had to maintain a level of skepticism. "Thank you, but I'm not sure what this is all about," Damien said, keeping his voice neutral. "What's your angle here, exactly?" Talia halted in front of a large, translucent viewing window. The stars outside were infinite, the vastness of space stretching out before them. She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with an almost predatory intensity. "Let me make it simple for you, Holt," she said, her voice now low and purposeful. "I need you to marry me." Damien blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Marry you? Why would I? I am the Queen of the Zaloth, but my rule is threatened," she continued, cutting him off. "There are factions within my empire that believe I am not fit to lead. They believe I should marry someone of my own race, someone they deem worthy of the throne. If I do not act quickly, I will be overthrown. That is where you come in." Damien's mind was struggling to catch up. He was still trying to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. "So, you want me to marry you? And you think that'll fix your political problems?" "Not just marry me, Captain," Talia corrected, her voice rising with a quiet but unmistakable authority. "I want you to rule with me, to become my king. You will have wealth, power, influence, beyond what any human could dream of. All you must do is pledge yourself to me and my cause." Damien's pulse quickened. The very idea was staggering. He wasn't a prince. He wasn't even from an influential family. He was a soldier, a veteran of countless battles, but nothing could have prepared him for a proposition like this. Marriage to an alien queen? The ruler of an empire spanning across the stars? But it wasn't just about power. He could see it in her eyes, the desperation, the fear of losing control. For all her grandeur, Talia was in a vulnerable position. Her people were divided, and she needed someone to solidify her reign. someone who could bridge the gap between her empire and a human race she knew so little about. Damien hesitated. The warrior in him wanted to refuse outright. He was a soldier, not a puppet. And yet, the idea of becoming king, of ruling over an empire, was alluring. The riches alone could ensure the future of his people. But he wasn't sure what this alliance truly meant. Would he be expected to sit idly by while she controlled everything? Or would he have to fight for his own place at her side? "Why me?" Damien asked, his voice almost incredulous. "Why not someone from your own people? Why a human?" Talia smiled, a gesture that was almost wistful. "You may not understand now, but I have studied your species, Captain. There is a fire in you, a drive. Humans are unlike any race I have encountered. You are capable of loyalty, yes, but also of ambition. You are not bound by the old traditions of our people. You think outside the box. That is why I believe you will make a worthy king." Damien felt a chill run down his spine. Was she telling him the truth? Or was she simply playing a dangerous game? He had seen too many leaders who talked like Talia, promising the world while hiding their true motives. But something about her seemed different. There was a sincerity in her eyes, a vulnerability that didn't match her imposing figure. "All right," Damien said, his voice firm. "I'll hear you out. But I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. If I'm going to play this game, I'll need to know the rules." Talia's smile widened, a glint of approval in her gaze. "Wise. I will show you the way, Holt. Together we can bring my empire into a new era. An era where humans and Zaloth stand side by side." As she led him further into the ship, Damien couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a world that was far more dangerous than anything he had faced before. The promise of power was intoxicating, but it came with a price, and he wasn't sure yet if he was ready to pay it. The days blurred together as Damien immersed himself in the strange, alien world of the Zaloth Empire. It was a world built on power, ancient traditions, and an unspoken understanding that survival depended on playing the game of politics and winning it. The Queen's offer, though tempting, came with a weight that Damien couldn't ignore. His every move was being watched, not just by the Zaloth elite but by Talia herself. Each morning, he awoke in his quarters aboard the ship, his mind churning with the complexities of the situation. Talia had kept her word, bringing him into the heart of the Empire's power. But with each passing day, the crown seemed to weigh heavier on his head. The Queen had begun his training immediately. He was thrust into the midst of Zaloth culture, forced to learn the intricacies of their society, their values, their history. In the beginning, he struggled. The Zaloth, with their long, storied past and rigid traditions, seemed a far cry from humanity's own relatively young civilization. To them, power wasn't just a matter of will. It was a deeply ingrained part of their genetic code, something that dictated every aspect of their lives. He sat in endless lessons, learning the alien history that had shaped their empire. He trained with the Zaloth military, their soldiers an intimidating force that moved with precision and purpose. The Zaloth had mastered every form of combat imaginable, from hand-to-hand techniques to the devastating use of energy-based weaponry. Damien, despite his own extensive military background, struggled to keep up. He was a human in an alien world, and the feeling was more apparent with every drill. But the real challenge lay in the cultural differences. The Zaloth were a race that valued strength and cunning above all else. Diplomacy, in their eyes, was a game of manipulation, where even the smallest misstep could result in exile or death. Damien had always been a soldier, trained for direct combat and strategy, but this was something else entirely. The political battlefield was subtle, ruthless, and endless. Queen Talia guided him through these lessons, her presence always looming in the background. She didn't push him too hard, but the weight of her expectations was palpable. She wanted him to succeed, but she also needed to test him, to see if he was truly worthy of the throne she had promised him. "Your people," Talia said one evening as they sat in her private quarters, studying a holographic map of the Empire's territories, "are quick to react, quick to act. But we, the Zaloth, we are patient. We wait for the perfect moment, the right move. You must learn to think like us. You must see beyond the immediate. Damien looked up at her, the soft glow of the holographic map reflecting in her piercing eyes. I'm trying, but you're asking me to change who I am. Talia's lips curled into a smile, though there was little humor in it. I am not asking you to abandon who you are. I am asking you to evolve. You are not just a soldier anymore, Holt. You are something more. And the choices you make will determine not just your fate, but the fate of my empire. He let her words sink in. She wasn't asking for him to lose his humanity. She was asking him to transcend it, to become something greater than he ever thought possible. In the days that followed, Damien became more attuned to the complexities of Zaloth politics. He attended high-level council meetings, where rival factions within the empire openly fought for control, using veiled words and sharp glances. He had been a soldier his entire life, but this was a war of the mind, a battlefield of manipulation and subtlety. It was in one of these meetings that Damien first saw the true scope of the political tension within the Zaloth Empire. The council chamber was massive, a grand hall adorned with strange alien symbols and alien artwork that seemed to come alive under the harsh lights. The Zaloth leaders sat in a semicircle, each one representing a powerful faction of the empire, their faces cold and calculating. Talia sat at the center, her regal presence commanding immediate attention. Her sharp gaze swept across the room as the various leaders began presenting their proposals for the future of the empire. Damien, standing silently beside her, was quickly learning that every word spoken in this room carried the weight of an entire people's future. There were no allies, only temporary agreements. One of the council members, a tall Zaloth general with dark, angular features, spoke up, his voice dripping with disdain. The Queen has placed too much faith in a human, he said, his eyes flicking toward Damien. What can a soldier from a primitive species possibly understand about ruling an empire? The Zaloth must remain in control. Only one of us can lead. Damien's jaw clenched, his hand instinctively moving toward the hilt of his sidearm. But he kept his composure. He was no fool. Reacting in anger would only play into their hands. This was a test not just of his skills but of his resolve. Talia's voice cut through the tension. Captain Holt has proven more than capable. He understands strength. He understands loyalty. And he understands what it means to lead. She turned toward Damien, her gaze softening just slightly, though still filled with the power of a queen. You have what they don't, Holt. You have what it takes to unite this empire. Damien met her eyes, his throat tight. The words were more than just praise. They were a declaration. Talia was putting him in the lion's den, making him a target for every faction in the room. She was asking him to trust her, to trust that he could stand beside her and not be consumed by the very empire she ruled. But it wasn't just the politics of the Zaloth that weighed on him. It was the creeping attraction he felt toward Talia herself. Beneath her cold exterior, there was something raw and vulnerable. She had fought tooth and nail to reach the throne, and now she needed him to help her keep it. He could see the cracks in her armor, the burden she carried. As the council meeting dragged on, Damien realized that his life had already changed irrevocably. Whether he liked it or not, he was a part of this empire now. And as much as he resented the political games, he couldn't deny the pull of power. He was standing on the edge of a future unlike any he could have imagined. But at what cost? In the days that followed, Damien spent more time with Talia, getting to know her on a deeper level. There were moments of softness, of shared understanding, but also moments of cold, calculating distance. He began to wonder if she was just using him as a pawn in her political game, or if, deep down, she truly needed him. No matter what he decided, Damien knew one thing. His world was now as alien as the empire he had stepped into. The tension in the Zaloth Empire was palpable. It wasn't just the political intrigue that filled the air. It was the very real threat of civil war. Factions within the empire were jockeying for power, and Talia's position on the throne was hanging by a fragile thread. It was a truth she didn't hide from Damien. In fact, she made sure he understood the gravity of the situation. Damien had always prided himself on being a soldier, someone who understood the value of loyalty and the cost of leadership. But the stakes here were unlike anything he had faced before. The power struggles of human governments were petty by comparison. This was life and death on an intergalactic scale. Queen Talia's private quarters had become a war room. The holographic map of the Zaloth Empire stretched across the room, outlining territories, military strongholds, and key factions that threatened to tear the empire apart. As Talia paced in front of the map, her expression hardened, eyes filled with determination. "We cannot afford another mistake," she said, her voice a low growl. "The rebellion is growing. If we don't act swiftly, we will lose everything." Damien stood at her side, trying to digest the overwhelming complexity of the situation. The factions that opposed her weren't just made up of disgruntled noble families. They were led by military leaders, commanders with their own loyal armies, who had the power to destabilize entire systems with a single battle. And the worst part? They knew Talia's weakness, her position as a queen without an heir, and her reliance on a human to secure her rule. "Your people," Damien said, his brow furrowing as he watched the map. "They're divided. You have some loyalists, but it seems like the rebels have more influence than I thought." "Correct," Talia said, pausing at the map to highlight a cluster of systems near the edge of the empire. "The Zaloth military is fractured. Some of my generals are still loyal to me, but many have their own ambitions. They see me as weak, an outsider who cannot rule without their support. But what they fail to understand is that I have something they do not." Damien raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She turned to face him, her eyes glinting with the fire of resolve. "You." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Damien had never expected to be more than a pawn in this game, but Talia's confidence in him was both a blessing and a curse. He had agreed to help her, but now it was clear that his role was much bigger than he had ever imagined. Her gaze softened for a brief moment. "You are my key to uniting the Empire, Holt. They do not see the strength in humans. But you can show them what our species is capable of. You have the heart of a warrior, something the Zaloth have long forgotten." Damien felt a mixture of pride and unease. He was still grappling with the weight of the decision he had made. Marrying Talia and becoming the king of an alien empire was no small thing. The responsibility felt like an anchor, dragging him deeper into a world that was as alluring as it was dangerous. And yet, the more he saw of the empire's fractured state, the more he realized that his role was not just symbolic, it was necessary. The only way to maintain peace, to keep the empire from falling apart, was to prove that he could lead. And with the rebellion growing stronger by the day, time was running out. Later that evening, Talia held a secret meeting with her most trusted military advisors. Damien was present, standing off to the side as the discussion grew more heated. General Zavik, a towering Zaloth warrior with a deep scar running across his face, slammed his fist on the table. "We cannot afford to wait any longer, Your Majesty." Zavik's voice was thunderous. "The rebels are gaining ground. Their forces are stronger than we anticipated, and we cannot hold the line much longer without reinforcements." Talia's jaw tightened. "We've already sent out requests for reinforcements, General. But they are scattered, and some of my generals are unwilling to join the fight. This is no longer just a military issue. This is a battle for the future of the Empire." Damien felt the weight of her words. The Zaloth were not united, they were splintered. And in a moment of rare vulnerability, Talia admitted what Damien had suspected all along. "If I do not win this war, I will lose everything. Not just my throne, but my people. This empire will crumble, and with it, the last hope for the Zaloth to remain a dominant force in the galaxy." The room fell silent, and Damien stepped forward, breaking the tension. "Then let's stop playing defense. We need to strike first, hit them where it hurts. We can't wait for reinforcements to come. We need to show them that they're underestimating us." Talia looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. "You're right. We cannot afford to wait any longer. But this will require more than just military strategy. We will need to unite the factions that remain loyal to me. And we need to demonstrate to them that I am the true ruler, No, the true queen of this empire. Damien glanced at the holographic map again, his mind racing through the possibilities. The rebellion's forces were spread out, but their strength was concentrated in key systems. If they could strike hard and fast, they could destabilize their entire command structure. It was risky, but it was the only chance they had. We'll need to split our forces, Damien suggested. Hit their supply lines, target their leadership. We can create confusion and weaken their position. Once we do that, we'll have a chance to take them down. Talia's eyes gleamed with approval. I'll trust your judgment, Holt. This is your plan. You're the strategist. Damien could feel the weight of her trust in his words, and it both thrilled and terrified him. It wasn't just her empire now, it was his. Whether he liked it or not, his fate was now tied to the Zaloth. His leadership would be tested not just in battle, but in his ability to lead and unite a fractured empire. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Damien worked alongside Talia's generals, organizing the fleet and coordinating the first strike against the rebel strongholds. The plan was bold, dangerous, and, if executed correctly, could turn the tide in their favor. But the risks were enormous. If they failed, the rebellion would grow stronger, and Talia's reign would be over. Damien felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but he couldn't back down now. He had already crossed the line from soldier to king, and now he would prove that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to adapt, to survive, and to fight when it mattered most. As the fleet prepared for the strike, Damien stood next to Talia on the bridge of the flagship. The stars outside twinkled with an eerie calm. For a moment, it felt as though everything was balanced on the edge of a knife. This is it, Damien said, turning to her. Either we win, or we lose everything. Talia's gaze was unwavering, her resolve stronger than ever. Then let's make sure we win, Holt. For both of our peoples. With a final nod, Damien took his place among the command crew, preparing for the battle that would decide the fate of an empire and the future of their unlikely alliance. The sound of the fleet engines humming to life reverberated throughout the flagship, a subtle but constant reminder that the moment of truth had arrived. The air was thick with anticipation as Damien and Talia stood side by side on the command deck, watching as the massive starships of the Zaloth fleet began to move into position. Their guns were primed, their shields charged, and the vast expanse of space lay ahead, silent, still, and full of danger. Damien's thoughts were focused, his military training kicking in as he reviewed the battle plan one last time. The fleet was ready, but it wasn't just the firepower they were relying on. It was their strategy, their ability to strike fast, disrupt the enemy, and then crush them before they had a chance to retaliate. It was a plan that required precision, timing, and ruthlessness. And for the first time, Damien wasn't just a soldier following orders, he was the one giving them. Talia stood next to him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes flickered with something deeper. Determination, yes, but also the weight of the responsibility she carried. If this failed, if the strike didn't secure the Zaloth Empire's future, everything she had worked for would be in jeopardy. Her throne, her people, everything. We move on my command, Damien said, his voice calm but firm. The bridge crew looked at him, their eyes filled with trust. Some of them had known him only a few weeks, but in this moment, they looked to him like a seasoned leader, one who had earned his place among the stars. Talia gave a slight nod, acknowledging the weight of the moment. Make sure we make them regret underestimating us, she said, her voice low but laced with the same authority she always carried. Damien returned the nod and turned to the crew. Prepare for engagement. Take us into position. The fleet moved into formation, the vast ships cutting through space like blades of light, their sensors reaching out toward the rebel strongholds. The targets were set, 3 key systems where the rebellion had established a foothold. The plan was simple. Strike hard and fast, cripple their defenses, and take out their leadership. In this game, it was all about making the first move and making it count. Damien's heart raced as they neared the first target, a heavily fortified mining colony that had become a staging ground for the rebels. The tension was palpable, every crew member on high alert. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. One miscalculation, one moment of hesitation, and everything could fall apart. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the alert klaxon. The rebel fleet had been spotted, large, heavily armed, and surprisingly well coordinated. They were waiting, just as Damien had anticipated. The strike was a trap, but it was one he had planned for. "Open fire," Damien commanded, his voice cold and steady. The ship's massive cannons unleashed a barrage of energy, a deafening roar that shook the flagship's hull. The rebel ships in front of them erupted in a burst of light as their shields failed and their hulls began to disintegrate under the sustained bombardment. The Zaloth fleet moved forward with brutal efficiency, their formations tighter than ever. Every ship knew its role, every gunner knew when to fire. Damien watched the battle unfold through the command deck's viewports, his mind calculating the trajectory of every attack, the movement of every enemy vessel. The rebels fought back fiercely, but they were no match for the overwhelming firepower of the Zaloth. The first wave of enemy ships scattered, desperately attempting to regroup and reposition. But Damien wasn't fooled. This was just the opening act. The real test was still to come. As the battle raged on, Talia stepped up beside him, her eyes cold as she observed the carnage. "They'll regroup soon. They have the numbers and they know we're pushing into their territory. The question is, how far are we willing to go to win this?" Damien's jaw tightened. The stakes were higher than ever. He was already committed. There was no turning back now. "We have to hit them hard, make them retreat. Take out their command ship, cut off their leadership. If they lose their head, they'll scatter." Talia nodded, her expression steely. "I'll trust you, Holt. Lead us to victory." He didn't need further encouragement. Damien turned to the communications officer. "Get me the command ship. Prepare a targeted strike on their flagship. Coordinates now." The officer worked swiftly, fingers flying over the controls. The map flickered to life with a bright red target. An enormous rebel command ship, surrounded by its last line of defense. The flagship had been positioned behind the rebel fleet, making it the last target. But that wasn't enough to stop Damien. He had planned this meticulously. "Fire all batteries on their flagship. We cut the head off the snake now," Damien barked. The energy beams slammed into the rebel flagship with a force that sent ripples through space. Explosions ripped across the vessel's surface, shields flaring in a desperate attempt to hold back the onslaught. But it was too late. The rebel ship's engines buckled under the barrage, and with a final, resounding explosion, it crumpled like a dying star. A wave of triumph washed over the Zaloth fleet. The remaining rebel ships, without leadership, were disoriented, vulnerable. But Damien knew the battle wasn't over yet. There were still pockets of resistance, pockets of rebels who refused to surrender. He wasn't about to let them regroup. "We move to the next target," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Keep the pressure on. No mercy." The fleet pushed forward, breaking through the rebel lines and sweeping into the second system. The rebel forces were reeling, struggling to maintain any semblance of order. And as the Zaloth fleet decimated their remaining forces, Damien could feel the shift in momentum. The tide of war had turned. Back on the flagship's command deck, the battle raged on, but Damien could feel the cracks beginning to show in the rebellion's resolve. Talia stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the screen as the last of the rebel fleet was driven to retreat. "It's almost over," she said quietly, though the words felt like a weight. Damien looked at her, and for the first time since he had agreed to marry her, he saw a flicker of something more. She wasn't just the cold, calculating queen anymore. She was a woman who had fought tooth and nail for her throne, who had risked everything to protect her people. And now, with the rebellion on the brink of collapse, she was closer than ever to securing her rule. "We did it," Damien said, though even as he spoke, he knew the war wasn't truly won yet. There would still be uprisings, still be enemies to face, but this was the turning point. Talia turned to him, her gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "You've proven yourself, Holt. You've earned more than just my trust. You've earned the future of the Empire." Damien nodded, but in the back of his mind, He knew the cost of victory was far from clear. They had defeated the rebellion's leaders, but what about the aftermath? What kind of empire would rise from the ashes of war? And what role would he play in it? As the last of the rebel ships were destroyed or scattered, Damien couldn't help but wonder. Was this truly the beginning of a new era for the Zaloth? Or was it the calm before a storm that would sweep away everything they had fought for? The aftermath of the battle left the Zaloth Empire with a fragile but undeniable victory. Damien stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out into the vast expanse of space, his mind racing. The rebel fleet was scattered, but they weren't gone. There would be pockets of resistance, insurgencies across the Empire's many systems. The war had shifted, but the true cost of victory was yet to be realized. Talia entered the command deck, her presence as commanding as ever, though Damien noticed a new weariness in her eyes. The battle had taken everything from her, her empire, her people, her sense of security, and while the rebellion had been dealt a heavy blow, the real struggle was only just beginning. She walked up beside him, her gaze fixed on the stars outside. It's over. The first part, at least. The rebellion has been broken. Damien didn't respond immediately, his thoughts consumed by the complexity of the situation. He knew better than anyone that breaking the rebels in battle didn't mean they were finished. There were always those who fought from the shadows, who plotted in secret. But what worried him more than that was the emerging question of his role in all this. He had been thrust into a position of unimaginable power and responsibility, and as much as he had risen to the occasion, the weight of it was starting to take its toll. Talia's voice broke through his reverie. You've done more than any Zaloth warrior could have. This is your victory as much as mine. Damien looked at her, taking in the depth of the words. He had come to care for her, not just as an ally but as someone who had fought tooth and nail to keep her empire alive. But the alliance they had forged was still fragile. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. I didn't do this alone, Damien said, his voice carrying the weight of the truth. We did this together. You led your people, Talia. I just helped you make the right calls when it mattered. She gave him a quiet, appreciative smile, but her eyes soon darkened again. But that's just it. Now I have to face the consequences of this victory. My people are fractured. The generals, the noble houses. Some will accept this, but others will rebel again, and soon, Damien could hear the frustration in her voice. The victory was hollow if it didn't bring real peace, and they both knew it. We need to move fast, Damien said. We can't give them time to regroup. If we can show strength now, we can keep the peace. Talia's eyes flickered with a new resolve, and for a moment, Damien could see the leader she truly was. One who didn't hesitate in the face of adversity. You're right. It's time for us to seize control fully. We'll show them that anyone who dares defy me will face not only my wrath but yours as well. Damien knew what she meant. If their enemies were to be cowed into submission, they would need to demonstrate power beyond just the military might they had already shown. They would need to send a message that this new reign, this new order, was not up for debate. The next few days were filled with tense meetings and strategic decisions. Talia's closest generals gathered in the war room, plotting the next steps in the effort to solidify her rule. Damien's role had expanded beyond that of a mere advisor. He was now being treated as the co-leader of this new era, the one who would ensure the empire stayed intact. Damien sat at the head of the table, reviewing the latest reports. The remaining pockets of resistance were small, but they were fierce. Rebel sympathizers hid in the shadows, and the nobility was far from unified. Some houses supported Talia's rule, but others were conspicuously silent, waiting for a sign of weakness before they made their move. I don't trust them, General Zavik said, his tone low but filled with menace. Some of the noble houses are still loyal to the old ways. They'll try to pull us down from the inside. Damien's fingers drummed on the edge of the table as he thought. The general was right. The Zaloth Empire was not one to change easily. They had a centuries-old system of power, and the nobles and military leaders who had been loyal to the old queen would not simply accept a human outsider as a part of the ruling family. We can't afford to wait for them to make a move, Damien said. We need to hit them first. Show them that any rebellion will be crushed. Talia, standing at the head of the table, gave a slow nod. Damien's right. We need to force their hands. We'll begin with the neutral houses, those who have yet to pledge loyalty. If we can neutralize them, the rest will fall in line. The room was silent for a moment, the gravity of the decision settling in. What Talia was proposing was not just political strategy, it was a message. To be a part of her empire, to support her rule, would require complete and total loyalty. For those who didn't comply, there would be no mercy. General Zavik leaned forward. You're sure about this, Your Majesty? If we move against them, it could ignite more resistance. We'll be forced to fight on two fronts. We'll crush them before they even have the chance to regroup, Talia replied, her voice like steel. This is the only way to secure our future. Damien nodded. He had already seen the bloodshed of war, but the reality of this next move would be different. It wasn't about the battlefield anymore. It was about shaping the empire from within, about taking control of the heart of the Zaloth people. Later that evening, as the decision was made and the fleet was readied for the next phase of their campaign, Damien found himself alone in his quarters, staring at the stars outside. His reflection in the glass seemed distant, fragmented. He was no longer just a soldier from Earth. He was a king in the making, a man who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. His thoughts drifted to the conversations he had with Talia. She had trusted him, and now she relied on him. There was no turning back. But the price of power wasn't just the blood of enemies. It was the sacrifices of those who stood beside you. His loyalty to her was absolute, but he was beginning to wonder. Was she becoming something he no longer recognized? The path ahead was uncertain. They had won the battle, but the true test of their leadership would come not in victory, but in how they ruled. The empire could either rise to unimaginable heights, or it could burn to the ground under the weight of its own ambition. He didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was clear. If he was going to stand by Talia, he would need to be as ruthless and determined as she was. And with that thought, Damien steeled himself for what was to come. The war may have been won, but the real battle was just beginning. The fleet had been deployed, the noble houses targeted, and the whispers of rebellion were beginning to die down under the weight of their swift, merciless crackdown. But as Damien stood at the edge of the command deck, overlooking the vast stretch of space, the victory felt hollow. The Zaloth Empire was solidifying its power, but at what cost? They had destroyed their enemies, but had they lost something even more precious in the process? Talia had made her choices, and Damien had stood by her every step of the way. But now, with the Empire's future hanging in the balance, the consequences of those choices were becoming clearer. Talia was a ruler in every sense of the word, her will unyielding, her resolve absolute. But in her quest for power, had she sacrificed the very essence of what had made her strong? Damien's mind wandered back to their first encounter, back when he had been a stranger in this alien world, struggling to find his place. Now he had become something else entirely, a symbol of strength, of the Zaloth people's renewed hope. The bond between him and Talia had grown, shifting from mere political necessity to something far deeper. But even as that bond strengthened, Damien knew the unspoken truth. There would be no simple, happy ending for them. This path they were on had no place for soft hearts. The door to the command deck slid open, and Talia stepped in, her regal figure cutting through the heavy silence. There was a weariness to her, one that Damien hadn't noticed before. Even the greatest leaders could be broken by the weight of the crown, and he could see now that she was beginning to show cracks. "Damien," she said, her voice soft but carrying the familiar strength that had guided her throughout the war. "We've done it. The rebels are in disarray, the nobility is bending to our will, and the people are rallying behind us. The empire is ours." He turned to face her, trying to meet her gaze but finding himself caught between admiration and doubt. She had fought for this, had bled for it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. "You've done more than anyone could have expected," Damien said, his voice tinged with both respect and concern. "But this empire, is it what you envisioned? Or is it becoming something else?" Talia's eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we're standing on the ashes of a war," Damien replied, the words heavier than he intended. "We've crushed our enemies, but at what cost? How many have died to bring us to this point? And what happens when the dust settles, when the blood is washed away? Who will we be then?" Talia's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. "This is how it has to be. There's no turning back now. The Empire needs stability, and I will give it to them, at any cost." "Even if that cost is your soul?" Damien asked quietly, his voice thick with the weight of his concern. Her gaze softened, but there was a hardness in her expression that made him hesitate. "You don't understand, Damien. You haven't lived my life. You haven't seen the things I've had to endure to get here. The Empire is my birthright, and I will not let it slip through my fingers. Not for anyone." He met her gaze, the gravity of her words settling over him like a heavy cloak. He understood more than she thought. He had sacrificed everything, his old life, his sense of self, for her, for the Empire. But what had he become in the process? Was he becoming the very thing he had fought against? "I'm not asking you to give up your crown, Talia," Damien said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I'm asking you to think about what kind of empire you're creating. An empire built on fear will never stand. An empire built on blood will always crumble. And I don't want to be a part of something that will ultimately destroy us." For a long moment, there was silence between them. The hum of the ship's engines and the distant whispers of the bridge crew were the only sounds in the room. Then, Talia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think I haven't thought about that? You think I haven't wondered whether the cost of this power will destroy me? I've given everything, Damien, and now I have nothing left to give but this empire. And if that means making hard choices, if it means pushing through the pain and the guilt, I will do it. Because that's what it takes to be a queen." Damien felt the weight of her words like a blow to his chest. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a woman who had given up her humanity to build this empire. And the question now was whether she could find her way back from the darkness she had embraced. "I don't want to lose you, Talia," Damien said, the words coming from a place deeper than he had realized. "I don't want to become a part of a system that destroys everything in its path. You've changed, but so have I, and maybe that's the problem. We've both become something we never intended." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the mask of the queen slipped, revealing the woman underneath, the woman he had come to care for, the woman who had fought so fiercely for her people. "Maybe we've both changed too much," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "But I can't go back. I have to keep moving forward. The Empire needs me." Damien took a step forward, his heart heavy with the realization that they were at an impasse. The path ahead would require sacrifices, perhaps even more than they had already made, and he had to decide whether he could live with the choices they were about to make. "I understand," he said quietly, "but I need you to understand, too. I can't be a part of an empire that destroys the very things it claims to protect. Not if we're going to build something worth saving." Talia's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, he saw a flicker of doubt in them, a momentary crack in her resolve. But it quickly disappeared, replaced by the unyielding will of the queen she had become. "You've been a good ally, Damien," she said softly, "but I've made my choice, and I can't afford to second-guess it." The silence that followed was deafening. There was no turning back from this moment. Damien knew that just as Talia knew it. The empire had been built on their shoulders, but the future, whether it would stand tall or fall apart, was a choice they both would have to live with. And with that, Damien turned away, walking toward the viewports once more. The stars outside felt colder now, distant and unreachable. They had won the battle, but the real fight for the soul of the empire was still to come. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.